This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What you are watching unfold is quieter than that, more dangerous than that. It's what happens when a system can no longer function in daylight, when it can't fix prices or trust or legitimacy, so it starts shutting off reality instead. Not to solve the problem, to survive it. This kind of failure doesn't arrive with sirens. It arrives with delays, with silence, with empty screens where information used to be. And when that silence appears, it's already too late to pretend this is local or temporary or contained, because systems that lose control at home don't collapse inward. They push outward. They export risk. They dare the world to look away. Stay with me here. Not because this is dramatic, but because if you miss the next step, you miss how this actually works. And once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee where it leads. What actually controls this system now is not ideology, not faith, not even fear, at least not the old kind. It's arithmetic. When prices rise faster than wages, obedience stops working. When food becomes unstable, slogans lose their power. And when a government can't correct either one, it stops governing and starts managing perception. That's the shift. Power no longer comes from consent or competence. It comes from controlling what can be seen, said, and shared, from narrowing reality until alternatives disappear. This is why the first reflex isn't reform. It's restriction. Cut the signal, jam the channels, slow the flow of information until outrage can't synchronize. What looks like strength is actually dependency. A system propped up by silence needs that silence to survive. And the moment it cracks, everything accelerates. Because once control is reduced to containment, there are only two options left: expand the perimeter or harden it completely, and neither choice stays internal for long. That's where this starts to move faster and darker. There was a time when pressure like this triggered adjustment. Prices rose, policies shifted, the system bent just enough to release heat. That's no longer the model. What changed wasn't one decision. It was a normalization, a slow acceptance that instability could be managed, not solved. That shortages could be endured. That inflation could be explained away. That delay was a strategy. Before, the system reacted to stress by opening channels. Now, it reacts by closing them. Before, unrest was a warning. Now, it's treated as a technical problem, something to be isolated, disconnected, muted. This is the most dangerous phase of any collapse. Not panic, not chaos. Normalization. When people adapt to dysfunction, leaders stop fearing consequences. And when consequences disappear from view, decisions get sharper, colder, more absolute. Nothing dramatic happens all at once, which is exactly why almost everyone misses the moment when reversal is no longer possible. And that's what sets the stage for the first visible shock. Then the shock arrives, not as a surprise. As a consequence, an economy under this kind of strain doesn't fail. Symbolically, it fails physically. In prices, in food, in bodies in the street. When inflation crosses a certain threshold, it stops being economic data and becomes a social force. 50% doesn't just erode savings, it breaks planning. 70% food inflation doesn't just hurt the poor. It pulls everyone into the same emergency. That's when protest stops being organized and starts being spontaneous. Unpredictable, impossible to negotiate with. The response is immediate, not dialogue. Disconnection. The signal goes dark. Internet access disappears. International calls drop. A population under pressure is suddenly sealed off from the outside world and from itself. This isn't about stopping messages. It's about stopping coordination. Because coordination is the one thing a failing system cannot afford. So what looks like a security move is actually triage, a way to slow collapse by isolating its symptoms. But here's the problem. When a state cuts itself off to survive, it also cuts off its exits. And once that happens, every remaining option becomes more extreme than the last. Because the next move can't be quiet. What's happening underneath all of this is simpler than it looks and more dangerous. When a system loses the ability to stabilize its economy, it looks for something else to stabilize instead. Not prices, not supply chains, narratives. Control shifts away from material outcomes and toward damage distribution. Who absorbs the pain? Who is insulated from it? Who gets protected and who gets exposed? The mechanism works like this. Economic pressure moves downward, force moves upward. Information gets squeezed in the middle. Those closest to power are buffered. Access remains. Liquidity remains. Mobility remains. Everyone else absorbs volatility directly. In wages that don't keep up, in food, that becomes optional. In risk, that becomes personal. And because the system can't reverse the flow without admitting failure, it compensates by exporting stress outward. Blame external enemies. Threaten escalation. Create the sense of a larger confrontation where internal collapse becomes secondary. This is who benefits. A regime that can reframe survival as resistance. And this is who pays. A population forced to choose between silence and sacrifice. Once a system reaches this stage, it's no longer trying to win. It's trying to last. And lasting, at this point, requires acceleration. Pressure keeps building. Faster now. Signals cut. Crowds move anyway. Casualties rise. Threats stop being implicit. They're spoken out loud. Not reform. Not concession. Retaliation. When a regime can't restore order internally, it widens the frame, warns of attacks, hints at retaliation beyond its borders, reminds everyone that collapse is not contained, it's contagious. This is escalation as insulation. Create a larger crisis so the original one disappears inside it. The pace accelerates because it has to. Every hour without resolution increases the risk of defection. Every blackout creates rumors faster than facts. Every death raises the cost of backing down. And backing down is no longer an option. Because once force is deployed at this scale, compromise looks like weakness. And weakness invites collapse. So the system doubles down. More control, more threat, more risk pushed outward. This is the moment where mistakes stop being reversible. Where timing replaces strategy, where survival decisions get made in minutes, not months. And here's the critical point. The system doesn't get to choose which path wins. It only chooses how fast it accelerates toward them. Every blackout, every threat, every delay, acceleration is already happening. The only question left is whether it bends, thins, or snaps. And we're not at the moment where that answer reveals itself yet. Here's the part no one likes to sit with. Systems don't collapse when they're exposed. They collapse when exposure stops mattering. When inflation becomes background, when shutdowns feel routine, when threats sound familiar enough to ignore, that's the danger now, not chaos. Acclimation. Because a world that learns to live with permanent instability becomes easier to manage and harder to save. Silence becomes policy. Delay becomes strategy. Risk becomes someone else's problem. This is not about one country or one regime or one moment in history. It's about whether modern systems can survive by severing reality faster than consequences can arrive. And once that door opens, it doesn't close neatly. So if you're still here, don't look away yet. Not because this ends tonight, but because the next phase won't announce itself. It will look like normalization, like restraint, like things settling down. And that's usually when the most important decisions are already being made off-screen, unvoted, irreversible. If you want to understand what comes next, how this pattern repeats, spreads, and eventually forces a reckoning, stay with me. Because the next video isn't about what's happening. It's about what's already locked in motion.